My name is Jared Smith-Valentine, and I am a therapist, and then I specialize as a sex therapist. When you become a therapist, there is a track that you take for a few years. First, you're able to practice it all, and then without additional supervision, and then finally, you're able to supervise others. And then once I completed all that, I went back to school to get a certification to be a sex therapist, which is called a CST. As for what I do, I see clients both individually and in relational settings, and we work on issues related to things like sexual identity, sexual function, um, erotic orientation. So, like what you get into, what you like, building confidence, building communication skills, finding yourself, and feeling good about your body or navigating issues in partnership. So, I do a lot.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts on how connected all of those things are that you just mentioned? Is it
Oh my
possible that
gosh.
one of those things that has nothing to do with sex might actually be deeply affecting someone's sex life?
Absolutely. I see this happen all the time. And to try not to get too nerdy or too derailed.
Please do.
So there's a model that I love that is very, very often used in sex therapy, right? It's called the Daily Circles model, Dailey. And it's this idea that sex is more than an identity or what you do. And in fact, it has these five dimensions, right? So what you find pleasurable, what you find like romantically intimate, your identity, your sexual and reproductive health, and your sexualization. So, like, what you're into, and it's all tied together by your values. And so, sex is a part of full personhood for a lot of people. And so often when we're having an issue in one area, it trickles into other areas. And so often when we have a communication issue or an issue in just like other dimensional wellness, how we're feeling, how we're interacting through the world, that shows up in sex, right? I guess another thing is like sex is an ongoing, lifelong narrative, right? Sex is a form of play, play is a form of language, and play is our first language. And so we create these stories throughout our life using sex, and sex is how we navigate and communicate with ourselves and others and share our stories.
What you just said, that we create stories throughout our life about sex, really stuck out to me because I'm wondering again, if somehow potentially along the way someone picks up something that may not even be accurate or true just based off of one bad experience or maybe just one misinformed article or whatever the case is. And that can then really affect their desire to express themselves fully sexually. It can potentially add shame and guilt.
Yeah.
I'm curious about your thoughts on how we develop our stories about sex.
I think it starts even with what we're told even before we perceive our own sexuality, what we see, the way people react to, and there's a societal shame and a societal quietness around sex. We don't like to talk about it. And I think that is a lot of people's narrative starting point. And so, kind of when you move through uh, the world, you pick up these little pieces, and oftentimes they are shame or stigma or trauma or any bevy of negative experiences. And when you don't know to think of sex as a language, then you don't know how to have that conversation with yourself or with others. And so one of the things that I really, really like about my work is when you have identified, whoa, I have this anxiety, I have this shame, I've been through this thing in the past. Oftentimes when people come to me, they'll say they've never had the opportunity to discuss those things with a therapist because they've never felt safe or they've never felt able. And it can be so freeing to finally get to have the full conversation. It can be so healing. If sex is part of the problem, oftentimes it is part of the solution.
It's interesting because I hypothesize that one of the reasons platforms like LiveJasmin, where we're from, is so successful and popular is because members are given this space, this arena to talk about sex and to talk about their fantasies and to talk about topics and explore these topics in a way that there's not many other places in society or in their life that they probably find that. And so I'm sure that it's very liberating. They see the effects of that on their life, whether they realize it or not consciously, the benefits that they're getting just from being able to be free and open in that way. Curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I have a few thoughts. My first is right is that a lot of sex workers are practicing, or cam workers, however people decide to describe themselves, are practicing unconditional positive regard when they work with their clients, right? They're giving people a space to talk about things that they're afraid to talk about elsewhere, and they're providing them a lot of non-judgment. And in fact, not only a lot of non-judgment, but oftentimes a lot of like excitement and enthusiasm, right? What I would say, and I want to be careful how I word this, is that I think sexual health is an untapped area of health and wellness. And I would not say that all people, I certainly wouldn't want to throw a label onto people who work in the sexual industry or adult media industry that they're uncomfortable with. But if sex is a part of our health, that means that sex work is a part of healthcare. And we have to embrace that a lot of people who are out here doing work are helping people work through issues. They're giving them communication when they feel isolated. They're making them feel like they have people who care about them. They're giving them a voice to have this conversation about what is important to them and what is sexy to them and what makes them feel enthusiastic and lively. And so, in a very, very real way, I do think that there's a healing element to sex and to people who are working in sex as professionals.
The way you said that just now was so incredibly powerful, and it was almost like a huge perspective shift. I've never thought of it like that because it is true. Our sexuality is a part of our health. It's a part of our whole person. And you're right, when you're dealing with professionals that are helping you to open up or heal or explore in that way, you could look at it as a form of wellness care.
Yeah, I wonder, have you ever heard of sexual surrogacy?
Yes, I
Yeah.
definitely have.
Well, I'm a big nerd, so sexual surrogacy is another topic that I have lots of feels about. I think it's so amazing the idea of your sexual health being so intertwined with the rest of your healthcare team, right? When you work with a when you work with a therapist, it's expected that they're, talking to your doctor. Why is it different when you're working with someone who is a sexual professional? We should respect people who are working to heal people as healthcare professionals. And it's sad that that doesn't always happen.
How long have you been a therapist?
So I have been a therapist for coming up on, oh gosh, am I coming up on 8 years? I think 8 years. It's one of those things I don't think about too often. And then since I've been in school, I've always had a fascination working with sexual issues. Coming from a queer community, I found that a lot of things just went underaddressed, and it was always important to me to try and like center those things. So a lot of my own research, and I'm fortunate to have gotten to work in a lot of settings that are very embracing of sex positivity. So that's given me a long leash. And then with the additional training, which I've been doing now for um, officially for about a year, but when you're doing the training, right, it's about a 3 year process altogether. So about 3 years altogether. Um, yeah, it's just been amazing. I love the work I do, and it's hard to believe it's coming up on 8 years.
Yeah, I asked because I can sense how passionate you are about what you do and how, yeah, passionate is the right word. From your perspective, the patients you've seen, what would you say is one of the number one blocks to sexual wellness collectively?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've already talked about social stigma. But I would take social stigma even further and say we don't have good sexual narratives like around what sex is allowed to look like or not allowed to look like. Like I said, I work with a lot of uh, queer, meaning LGBTQ plus people. I also work with several other types of people as well. But, people will come in to see me and they will be trying so hard to force their relationship or their sex or the way that they and their partner interact into this little tiny box. And I think a lot of people have never asked themselves why. Something that really stood out to me in my training and has been a question that I try to come back to is when we look at other areas of life for people. What do what do you want to be when you grow up? And, who do you look up to? What do you like about your parents? What do you like about these people in your life? Who's your favorite athlete? So much of life is figuring out how you want to be and giving yourself permission to be unique by experiencing role models. But when I ask clients the question, who are your sexual role models? People almost never have an answer, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, if you were to ask me that, I'd be like, what? I don't even know. Like, I haven't even thought about that. But like, you're pointing to the issue because I couldn't answer it because I guess I don't even know enough about anyone in that way or have like the right information to even have someone to have a role model. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that's enough to kind of expand on, the field of sex work. I think when people are out and open and share themselves, they allow themselves to kind of become mentors so that down the road someone can answer the question, who is my sexual role model? And, someone might be like, I had this interaction with a partner, or I use a cam service, or I subscribe to an OnlyFans. And the way that person interacts with their sexuality, gosh, that's how I want to feel about myself. And I think that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, and that's a great perspective, is even just seeing how people interact with their own sexuality and seeing if that's something that you would love to be able to tap into or emulate. I'm curious your thoughts about this interesting dynamic, this dance of potentially really seeking out connection or something else, but over the guise of something that is sexual. Does it, because it is so vulnerable, this topic and intimacy, does it just create bonds that quicker? Or are we using sex for connection or connection for sex?
Yeah, that's a great question, a great chicken and egg.
Totally.
I'm gonna answer it with I think it'd be easiest for me to answer to start out with kind of a connected story, right? So when I started out in therapy, where I started out is suicide prevention and working different lines where people call in. And one of the things that I think is really surprising to people is that most people who call a suicide prevention hotline, they aren't calling because they're in an acute crisis and they're about to end their life. They're calling because they had a bad day and they have no one to talk about and they're so stressed out and they're safe, but they just want to connect to someone and have someone co-regulate with them, walk them through calming down, remind them of what their options are. And I think connection has that nature of we just need other people to co-regulate, most of us. And I think that it's unsurprising to me, for the same reason that that is the case with prevention lines. It is unsurprising to me that the top grossing people are not, spending their longest calls with it being overtly explicit the whole time. I think that what a lot of people are craving is connection, the ability to have someone on a bad day, the ability to feel like another human being relates to your experience. I I think that kind of takes me back to sex work as healthcare, right? Is this idea that there's more than sex to sex work. It's a lot of care and compassion work. It's a lot of making someone feel welcome and comfortable and unjudged.
What are your thoughts on why we are so uncomfortable with even the topic of sexuality?
Yeah, I think it comes from a vulnerability, which we've already named over and over again. And then I think there is this really strange societal stigma. Uh, and I think it comes from a lot of places, but you're right. People do show up and they're having sex and they're not communicating about it. I think a big piece of it is because we don't communicate about sex, because it's hush hush and very cold and clinical when we give people education. It's just something you're supposed to know and be good at. And you can't talk to people about it because, uh, well, if I did ask my partner, hey, is this working for you? Gosh, what if their answer devastates me? Or, if we are single and we're both interested in opening up our relationship, gosh, that's a scary conversation. If we are, talking to a sexual health professional, sitting with someone like myself, oftentimes I have to inform people on topics down to the basic bare bones of things like there's a hell of a lot more to sex than just wanting to experience an orgasm. A lot of people have a very one note idea of what sex is, and so they don't even have the language to have the conversations they would like to have. I don't think it's because people don't care. I think it's because they don't have a language and they weren't raised with a compassionate society that allows to have conversations about sex as a dimension of wellness.
So, what you're saying is it's just programmed in from the beginning that we're almost taught that we just don't talk about this, it's uncomfortable, and we keep that behavior and that trait.
Yeah, and I also think, a lot of it comes down to, right, some of the messaging a lot of us grew up with. I grew up with the way we talked to kids about consent being bad touch and no means no. And I think bad touch, especially, the idea of like, don't touch, you have to tell an adult if you're touched here because like that's bad. People can't touch you in these bad areas. I think that in and of itself, right? How much do you internalize from the idea that there's bad areas that on your body that you're not allowed to talk about? Um, of course, now we use different models of consent, and obviously we it's stratified by what's age appropriate. But now we talk to people about more of like, hey, if something's uncomfortable, you need to have a conversation. Or there was the yes means yes for a while instead of no means no. Or I think the current one by Planned Parenthood is this cool acronym called FRIES, which I really like.
And what does fries stand for?
Oh gosh, I'm on the spot. So freely given, reversible, informed, freely given, reversible, informed. I can't think of the E or the S. Oh, the S I think might be the other two. I'm gonna have to look it up. Enthusiastic, which we've already talked about today, and specific. So I have, if I'm consenting to something, I have the right to know exactly what it is. Like, you sent me a form today.
Yes, exactly. I think yeah, that word consent is in the paragraph too. Like, do you consent
Yeah.
to Commercial uses. Yeah, absolutely. I really like that, actually. They did a good job with that one.
Invite curiosity where you find judgment. If instead of having this, oh, I had this thought, I'm a bad person, it really can be a huge switch to just go to, I had this thought, huh, I wonder what that's about, and just kind of let it hang out for a minute. Um, I would say that daily circles of sexuality model we discussed, and also looking into purity culture as it exists. There's a lot of good workbooks, right? Those are all cool things. And then when it comes to what you can do just on your own, there's one big reframe that I think a lot of people don't consider. And that is, to the degree that you feel like you have a good relationship with it, masturbation as a radical act of self-love, right? It's literally taking time to make yourself feel good, to get in touch with your body, to just enjoy your presence. And that's something that's so rare. So I would say those things, and the underpinning of it all is, if you're looking for something to try reframing masturbation for yourself as a radical act of self-love.
I think that's really well said. And yeah, if you're getting ready to explore sexuality, what better place than yourself, right?
Well, in what safer place than yourself, right? If
I
you do
love
have
that.
concerns around the safety, the safest sex is solo or virtual sex.
Absolutely. And that's definitely something I've heard a lot from the members I've interviewed is part of the reason that they're on LiveJasmin is because they want to explore their sexuality and these fantasies, but they don't necessarily want to do it in a way that could potentially put them at risk if they don't have a regular partner or whatever they're looking for. And so they feel like virtual is the one of the safest ways that they can go about it.
Yeah, I did a recent so every once in a while I will teach for an institute that trains sex therapists up here in Ohio. I recently did a class and it was about teledildonics and VR, and how just the landscape of virtual sex is just like expanding at this crazy rate, and how connected we can be now from so far away. Um, because I have a lot of clients who do use teledildonics, so like using long distance sex play and sex toys, and I have a growing number of clients who a lot of their dates and even like the lives they live with their partners are largely virtual via VR, and I think there's an enormous future there, and it's a very cool growth area of sexual wellness.
I agree. I agree. I actually, have you heard of the app? I mean, it's different, but it's on the same topic. Have you heard of this new app called Replica?
I am not.
Okay, so it's really interesting. It basically allows you to completely design an AI, whatever you want them to be, but they're some type of person in your life or connection in your life. And you can literally, so the woman who made the app had lost her best friend. And she created this AI software and she fed the software messages that her friend had written her. So the personality developed as her friend. And so a lot of people are creating their perfect partner, best friend, whatever the case is, as an AI character, and they're feeling connected in that way. Going back to that point of having this connection wherever you can get it, really, because we need it, you know?
Absolutely. We are creatures of connection. And I think I don't know if replica is what he uses, but one of my partners actually has something similar where they have a virtual AI boyfriend that is in this app, it, and they can have ongoing conversations, and it like is interested in your goals and your tasks and tries to help motivate you. And so like it's a pretty cool little thing. And then, more on the, I guess more on the sexual like resource side of things, it kind of brings me back to are you familiar with Slutbot at all?
No.
Slutbot is one of my favorite tools. It is a little AI program, and you send it like you put your phone number in, and it starts to teach you how to responsibly, in a consent-oriented way, sext with people. So if you're uncomfortable and you don't have that skill, and you're like, I want to be able to dirty talk with people, but I just feel so weird or I don't want to cross a line, it helps teach you how to do that. And then if you like do get to the end and you've successfully navigated it, it asks if it can send you a nude, and you get a little cartoon robot nude at the end.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
That is fascinating. That is, I mean, actually, that's very useful. Like, that is very
Because
useful.
again, it's something we don't teach people, right? Nobody has a role model for how to sext. Well, somebody may. Most people do not.
I was about to say, I mean, if you have just like the greatest best friend that really pulled you under their wing or something like that, like, but yeah, in general, exactly. You're absolutely right. Most people are not taught how to really go there, explore that. You learn through trial and error, if you get those opportunities. But yeah, to have something that kind of coaches you and you can practice with, that's incredible. I'm gonna have to look up this app actually.
I like it. It's a lot of fun. And it is surprisingly, since it's an AI in your mind, you're like, oh, well, this will be silly. But like, it tells you sexy things and you respond to it. It's very cool.
Oh, I am definitely going to check this out. Is it, yeah, it's an app
Um,
or is
so
it,
it is not an app, it's a website.
okay. In your career, have you ever seen a piece of research or some fact that just stuck out to you as so fascinating? I mean, I'm sure you've seen tons, but anything that comes to your mind.
There's a lot, but I would say the thing that is most fascinating to me as a penis owner, so I grew up cis and have a penis, and so I've never experienced having a vulva. 68% of people who are vulva owners report discomfort or to have, not seen their vulva. The idea that a majority of people who own a vulva have been, you know, so uncomfortable with it that it's something they try to avoid looking at is really a big paradigm shift when you're a penis owner, because when you have a penis, you see it every day. When you have a vulva, you don't. And so it's really just this interesting paradigm shift that completely changed the way I think about how we stigmatize people who are vulva owners and what healthcare has to look like if what a lot of people are coming into a clinic with is, yeah, not only am I not uncomfortable talking to you about this, but I'm uncomfortable just experiencing this part of my body for myself. So I think that's the thing that has probably stuck with me the most.
Yeah, even you saying that, that was like a really interesting distinction and thought. Like that is true. And I hadn't really thought about that in that way. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
And I give a bonus one because there's one other one that I think sticks with me a lot. Um,
Please.
additionally, coming from Kinsey's initial research, right? The idea that 30% of people who identify as men have had a same-sex interaction ending in orgasm. Um, it's so distinct for me that that is such a large number, a third of people. Um, and yet there's so much scrutiny around how we identify and what labels we have to wear. And so few people would be, willing to explore or say that openly. And I think that also speaks to the amount of stigma that just exists around who we have sex with, how we have sex, what is the correct and incorrect way, these very rigid boxes and narratives that are laid on us.
I'm curious if there's anything about human connection, human sexuality, your work, LiveJasmin, that we haven't talked about, but you want to share.
I think I would just like to reemphasize that the work is not so different that at the end of the day, a lot of people who work in all kinds of dimensional wellness are working on connecting and healing and creating community, um, creating a sense of adventure and connection for people who feel isolated. And whether you are coming in to see me or you are, using a cam service or you're mailing a letter to someone you care about and haven't spoken to in a while, if you're old fashioned and still use the snail mail. Connection is such a underpinning of human growth, right? Belonging is so important to our lifelong development. And I think it's amazing how much growth in my lifetime, being born in 89 to today. It's so amazing how connected I can be with other people in a way that people generations before me never could. And I really look forward to the future of what that continues to look like.
That's an incredible perspective and realization that you're exactly right. Generations prior were not able to just have virtual interviews and then publish this information for anyone to see. And before, everything had to be in person. I'm sure even in your practice, I'm sure at this stage you're doing some type of digital telehealth or Zoom, whatever the case is.
Yeah. Yeah. My practice is actually mostly virtual because I started at one of my workplaces during the height of the pandemic. And so I was entirely virtual for a while. And, certainly I think there are some things that are easier to accomplish in person, but by and large, telehealth and the ability to meet, like using Zoom and other virtual means is so life-changing and life-saving. There are clients who would never get to see me or their doctor or their relatives that live far away, were it not for, um, this kind of virtual renaissance. And I really try not to take that for granted, that I think there is a lot of really cool connection there.
Beautiful. My final my final connection. I hope not my final connection. I want many more connections. I hope my final question is, from your experience, your perspective, what are our next steps in laying a foundation for a more sexually healthy society?
Yeah. Well, I think more communication. I think paying attention to the narrative, um, asking yourself who your role models are, allowing yourself to be a mentor and a role model to other people, um, and just understanding, kind of like we've discussed over and over again today, that sex is often more than sex, right? It's often connection, it's often community, it's often belonging, it's often fantasy, it's often processing. And seeing sex as more than sex, I think, is the biggest barrier, right? I think once we see sex as the part of human wellness that it is, then the ability for it to the ability for us to improve our relationship with it is just limitless at that point.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
This has been a great interview. I really enjoyed it. You brought some serious perspective shifts, which I really appreciated.
Well, I appreciate being able to do that.